Welcome to video number 5 on GST return preparation in Xero. So to access GST returns, go to Reports, GST return. And depending on where you are at in your GST return preparation cycle, will depend on what you see on the screen here. So if you have a return that hasn't been marked as final in Xero yet, it will show like this. If you have finalized all your GST returns and you just want to look at your current GST result, you can click on Preview Period So Far. In this case, we're wanting to file this particular GST return. So I'm just going to click on Draft and it will now load the return. Now in this case, because I'm in the demo file and there's not many transactions in it, the return's loaded quite quickly. If you have a large number of transactions, it may take a while for the return to load. So just give it some time because it will be processing those transactions and building this report. So the GST return on this screen looks exactly like your paper return with the same box references. You have the boxes where you can enter manual adjustments if you need to. If you want to look at the amounts that make up the particular lines that you can see on this report, go to GST Audit Report. It will provide you with a breakdown of all the transactions from 1st of June to 31st of July in this case, and it will separate them between GST on expenses, GST on income, and no GST. You can sort these transactions by any one of these columns, which can be quite useful if you want, when you're having a quick scan, to make sure that everything that you've coded has going to the right place and GST has been claimed correctly. So before you file a return, I do recommend going through this page to make sure that what you've actually coded is correct. If you haven't coded all the transactions in this particular time frame, Xero will give you a warning that will show at the top of the screen that will tell you that you've got transactions that haven't been coded and will tell you how many. If you have that warning, don't do anything more, code those transactions first and then come back to your return, because you need to make sure they're all coded before you file it, because you don't want to miss something that needs to be included in your GST return. This message that some of you have probably seen talks about that the late filing penalties that IRD will put in place if you are late filing a GST return. If you are late filing a return, all this message is saying is that Xero cannot calculate the late filing and penalties and interest, because that's something IRD has to handle. So all it will be showing you is the GST that you have to pay or the GST that you have to be refunded, but it won't be able to take into account those interest and penalties. If you've finalized a prior GST return and then made changes in that return period, you'll have an extra tab up here which will say Late GST Claims. That covers off any of those transactions that have been changed and will pull through an adjustment into these boxes. If the amount that's pulled through is quite substantial, so say over $300 or $500, get in touch with your contact at Nexia New Zealand just to discuss that and make sure that filing those adjustments in the adjustments box is going to work out and isn't going to cause any issues. I also have a GST checklist which goes through each of the steps for preparing your GST return and talks about late GST claims, and also talks about the crucial step of saving your GST return as a final. The key reason for this is that if you don't save your return as a final return when you go to file it with IRD, is that if you go and make changes to that GST return period afterwards, it will update the GST return, and it will therefore result in your Xero GST return being different to what you filed with IRD, which will cause all sorts of issues when you come to reconciling GST at year end. At the bottom of this checklist, you also have a tick box option where you can put ticks beside all of the various stages to make sure that you have gone and filed your return correctly through Xero. If any of you would like a copy of this checklist, if you don't have it already, please feel free to email me on jwilson, W-I-L-S-O-N, at nexiachch.co.nz. And that concludes the GST section of this seminar. The next video that I'll be covering off will be looking at the contacts within Xero.